Welcome back, pet parent. Today we are talking more about gut health. And obviously, right here on the Pet Parenting Reset, this is what we do. We talk about gut health all the time because it is so important for so many reasons. And we're talking very specifically about FMT today. And if you're not familiar with that, don't worry, hang in there. We're going to break it all down. I have been utilizing FMT with my dog and with my clients' dogs for quite a while now. I love it. I feel like I use it a little bit differently than a lot of other people do, but we can get into all of that. We can talk about all of that. Before I introduce my guest, who is very patiently waiting, and I appreciate that. If you remember not too long ago, I had Billy Hookman back on the podcast, and we were talking about utilizing FMT in combination with the new Green Juju probiotics. So keep that in the back of your mind as we talk through today's episode. But again, thank you so much for waiting, Jason. I have Jason Klopp with Legacy Biome joining us today. Thank you so much for being here, Jason. How are you doing?
Happy to join in, and I'm excited to hear more as well from you as far as how you're using it. And who knows, maybe I'll be the devil's advocate and critique.
Yeah, no, I feel like, everybody, when you practice, when you are, working one-on-one with pets, you just find different things work differently for different animals, for different situations, for different. And so I think everybody kind of tweaks things just a little bit and we find ways that we think work for us. But I am here to learn from you because you have been studying working in FMT for quite a while now. And so I want to hear from you. We're going to talk more about legacy specifically later on, but can you just start out by explaining what FMT is, what we're talking about here?
Yeah, and I think to that earlier point, like that's the advantage of working with someone like yourself who has the experience, who can be more objective, right? Like we need to create rough guidance, rough protocols, but ultimately each pet, just like each pet parent, is very individual, right? How they got to be sick and unwell to begin with is very different. And so their path to recovery is going to be very different. Now, there's some foundational pieces that you just have to get right for all pets, like you got to get their diet right. But outside of that, I mean, there's just so much individual role that is played in recovering a dog from whatever issues they're dealing with. And so that having an individual guidance is really key and helpful. So I'm a huge advocate of working with pet health coaches and functional or integrative, however you want to term them, veterinarians. And so quickly though, to introduce how I got to this pet world space, actually my background's as a naturopathic doctor. And so I first began treating humans with FMT back starting in 2018 and spent many years treating hundreds of patients with a whole variety of different conditions. And so a lot of what I refer to is based on my experience in treating humans, because that's where the bulk of the research is when it comes to the gut microbiome. There is starting to be more research developing in dogs and cats when it comes to the microbiome testing, FMT treatment, and we're actually going to be in the next short while launching our own small study with the FMT as an intervention. So what is FMT? So it stands for fecal microbiota transplant. So it really sounds like it is. Oftentimes though, people hear the word transplant and they start to think, wait a minute, there's going to be like a surgery, just like a liver transplant or a kidney transplant. There is no surgery. The predominant method of delivery is actually via capsules. The product looks very similar to a probiotic. So there's no, dealing with poop or smells or odors or any other issues like that. It's a very clean product, and we're concentrating for the microbiome in the actual product itself. The product comes as a double encapsulated, so it's enteric coated, which means that it can get through the stomach acid and be mostly intact by the time it hits the small intestine, where it will slowly begin to open. And the premise of FMT, or fecal microbiota transplant, is that we're trying to identify very healthy, carefully screened donor dogs and cats who have been raised naturally over many generations to ensure that they have the healthiest microbiome possible. Because the microbiome is critical for, well, basically everything. I mean, the gut microbiome is tied to all organ systems. Most people are aware of the gut brain connection, but the reality is we have a gut every other organ system connection. Gut brain, gut heart, gut lung, gut skin, gut, you name it. They're all connected. And so it is this really foundational piece where if it's off, if the gut microbiome is imbalanced, it will have a negative feedback loop to whatever organ system it's interacting with, whether it's the immune system or the brain. And so by improving gut function and gut health overall via, in this context, a fecal transplant, you can start to see really important and transformative changes in whatever organ system is impacted.
Yeah, it really does impact everything in the body. And I think that's why we talk about gut health so much. Not just, I mean, any and everything going on in the body, because most of the immune system is in the gut, right? So we're impacting just like you said, we're impacting everything, but also I like to use it behaviorally as well. You talked about the gut brain axis, and I think we overlook that even more than all of the other things, because the other things make sense, I think, to people. There's still a lot of people who, especially with their dog, well, I don't know, I think with people too, like we just really overlook the impact of our gut health on our mental health, on our emotional health. Definitely a huge has a huge impact. And, we're really quick, especially with dogs, to think, oh, my dog needs to be trained. And I'm a big advocate for positive reinforcement training, but this is kind of how I got into this space to begin with. I was a positive reinforcement dog trainer, and I started switching my clients to fresh food diets and put myself out of a job. And I'm like, I see. I see what's happening here, right? Like, I'm thrilled to be putting myself out of a job, because that means that these pets are feeling better. So now they're acting better, they're behaving better, they're actually able to pay attention and focus and listen to what you're saying to them, and try to do the things you're asking of them, because they want to do. Like, our dogs are really different in that way, in that we have put them in an environment that is not at all natural to them. We have asked them to behave in a totally different manner than what is natural to them, and given them like no structure and guidelines to do so. And yet they still want to do it. They still want, right?
It's pretty shocking, isn't it? And I mean, that's the reality, right? I mean, if anybody has, been around or has a toddler, like if they can't communicate, but they're feeling anxious or they're feeling some sort of pain, they're going to act out in behaviors. And so it's not very, dogs can't talk, unfortunately. Although maybe fortunately, I don't know. I've wondered, like what's going on in their noggin? I'd love to know what's going on in there. But maybe one day with AI and all these, brain implants and things, we'll be able to, get to understand what dogs are actually thinking. The reality is probably not a lot, but yeah, I mean, that's their way of communicating, right? So if they're in pain and you can't see it expressed as a symptom, they're going to react as a behavior, right? So it's going to come out some way. That's just the body's natural way of communicating what's going on in the absence of being able to actually verbalize something. And so it's really important to look for these cues that aren't necessarily just physical symptoms. In some of these contexts, it can be behaviors.
So I'm really curious, being a naturopathic doctor, that's something I think most people are not super familiar with. It's not something most people either have access to or realize that they have access to, because you do practice very differently from a traditional Western allopathic medicine doctor. One of the things, and this comes up a lot in for me when I'm talking to clients, is trying to get them over that really huge hurdle of thinking in allopathic medicine mindset. So FMT, I think, really falls into that like naturopathic, functional, holistic medicine mindset, where we are not just as an example. I was talking to a potential client the other day, and I was explaining to her that, because she was talking about her cat having an excessive amount of a certain bacteria in her gut microbiome, and I was explaining to her that that's really great information, that's really great data. But because she was talking about, metronidazole being really great at killing off this particular bacteria. And I'm like, that's wonderful. But I find that when we stop focusing on trying to kill or eradicate something, and we start focusing on how to create a more like a harmonial balance, and we're not trying to say, I don't want this bacteria. We do want this bacteria. We just want to adjust the levels. Like, that's a really huge shift in thinking, and I think that's where, like, FMT really comes into play. Maybe you can explain that a little bit better than I can, though.
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally with you. I mean, again, a lot of context for what I'm sharing comes from my experience in treating humans, but it is really a philosophy shift that is required, right? Like thinking the sort of conventional way of thinking is that like you can kill your way to health. But if anything is displayed in the amount of disease that we're seeing in the spike in diseases, chronic diseases, both in humans and in our pets, that path is not working. We
Yeah.
can't kill our way to better health. It just doesn't work. And the reality is, in the context of what your friend shared, like having an elevated bacteria, like if you were to just to knock that down, it's going to cause something else to go up. And it's going to just be this constant game where at the net, you're going to end up with an even worse microbiome. And having pathogenic or overgrown species of bacteria or fungi, etc., is just an indicator that the microbiome is out of balance. Like the whole point of the human body and the pet body is to maintain balance. That's what it's trying to do all the time. Whether it's with your blood pressure, your blood pH, everything is about maintaining balance and homeostasis. And so the more that you try to manipulate individual variables, you're going to cause some other system to be impacted and negatively affected. And so the goal needs to be to try to give the microbiome and the body more generally what it needs to do what it's designed to do and has been doing for thousands or millions of years depending on your worldview. And so it it can work. The reality is there are some cases where these interventions are needed. So I'm not like, anti using these types of interventions. They can be a short-term net benefit. But then the question is, okay, what can we do once we've done this intervention to get back to rebuilding a healthy, balanced system? And in the context of FMT, I mean, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to give a representation of what is the healthiest possible microbiome in a dog or cat that's been living very healthy for many generations, doesn't have all these typical chronic diseases, and giving that as a transplant, something that can go in and educate, if you will, the microbiome. Okay, this is what healthy looks like, and start to create and engraft within the pet's microbiome and creating that balance so that it can monitor and prune, as if you will, itself, right? Like forests, we don't go into forests and like, oh, let's like cut out all these trees. Like the forest is managing itself unless there's been some problematic invasive species or some crazy thing like that. But generally speaking, right, like nature knows how to maintain itself. And that's what we're trying to do within the gut microbiome. It will manage itself. The trouble is if you introduce some of these conventional, anti therapies, whether it's antibiotics or other things, it will then create an imbalance and potentially disease.
Yeah. So with FMT, I just kind of want to circle back to what you just said. You are introducing what the microbiome should look like to try to educate. And then I think that's a maybe easier for us to understand, but I'm trying to figure out how we are educating our body system. We're we're just providing it like this example of like, if I'm gonna hand this to you, I'm gonna give this to you to utilize, to absorb, to do all the things, to adjust the bacteria that are currently in your gut, so you can see how this feels. Like,
Yeah, in part, I think that's a part of the way to think about it. Um, you know, truthfully, we don't know exactly how it works, even though there's
okay,
been like, you know, hundreds and thousands of studies in this, general space. It's still not totally clear. The likely path is that yes, we are putting in this whole microbiome product that includes bacteria, that includes fungus and viruses and parasites and a whole bunch of things that in and of like all combined make up the microbiome. And the whole concept or the whole goal is to get these new microbes to actually engraft and become a part of your pet's new microbiome. And in studies, again, in humans, but the donor's microbiome and then the recipient's microbiome, in this context, the pet, they're very different after FMT. So the FMT, the new microbiome from the pet won't look like exactly like the donors, and it won't look exactly like what they had before. So they'll basically take on what they need or what was imbalanced, and there'll be a new microbiome. And a lot of it will also depend on, their environment, their lifestyle, their diet, right? So those factors will have an impact on what types of bugs and microbes actually engraft and become a part of the microbiome. And the advantage of dosing over a somewhat longer period of time, depending on the case, is that it gives you the opportunity to keep giving, in some sense, that reminder like, here's what a healthy microbiome looks like. So it can continue to try to emulate that. And then over time, it's formed, it's there. And as long as the diet and lifestyle and all the other things are good, that microbiome can continue to be healthy. Now, as you age, naturally the microbiome does decline, unfortunately, and so there is the potential advantage at some points to actually do some form of a booster along the way. But broadly speaking, that microbiome and grafts, it becomes a part of their new gut, and as long as it's being supported, it's there to stay.
That is very important. I want to talk about that a little bit later about supporting it. What are when we think about candidates for FMT therapies, and there are so today we're specifically talking about, the capsules that Legacy Biome has available, but I know there's also, there are some veterinarians out there that will do.
Unless,
Yes, thank you for I was trying to think of a good way to I'm like, "Do I wanna say this out loud?" Yes, so they will do that in office, and that I understand can be really, really effective. So, I mean, that's not available to everybody though, right? Like, that's just
yeah,
not
we
something
we
every
do make
veterinarian
and
does.
sell those to veterinarians who wanna do the procedure in office. Oftentimes, they're doing some sort of procedure beforehand, in many cases, rectal ozone. So they'll do that first, and then they'll follow it up with the rectal enema. And so, yeah, there's an opportunity to do that. It's interesting though, because many years ago, prior to where we're at now when it comes to FMT manufacturing, there were no FMT capsules. It just wasn't a thing yet. That sort of started changing, at least in humans, at around 2019, and now more and more studies are utilizing FMT capsules, and they're comparing them from an efficacy standpoint. The real advantage is, especially for dogs, right? Like trying to get a dog to listen to you, to hold it, like, hold it in, Fluffy. Like, yeah, good
Yeah,
luck, right?
right?
And so that's obviously a concern. Of course, you could put the dog in the crate and hopefully they don't get urgency or something, and hopefully they'll hold it in for a few hours. But that can be a real challenge. But in humans, when they've studied them for C. diff, which is a pretty serious GI infection that results in diarrhea, and dogs get the same thing, what happens is that they compared capsules to colonoscopies to enemas. And both capsules and colonoscopies had about a 90% cure rate for C. diff. Enemas, on the other hand, had about a 60% cure rate for C. diff. And so it's showing that it's important to try to inoculate a bigger portion of the GI tract, which the colonoscopy does. It goes right up to the end of the colon, where the small intestine transitions to the large, and then capsules will inoculate the whole thing. So I do think there's definitely use cases for the enemas. I know some vets really prefer those, but generally speaking, it is something that, there are some pretty savvy pet parents out there who will probably do almost any procedure. But most cases, it's going to be better done, in a veterinarian office in a more controlled environment.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that's good to know about the capsules as well, that, they're gonna reach more places and do
Sure,
all the
and
things.
I think the advantage as well, of the capsules, is that you can treat over a longer period of time. So
Mhm.
instead of doing a single enema procedure and then kind of hoping for the best, or having to keep going in to bring your dog in for, say, a weekly enema or something, that can get costly. It's time consuming. There's all these variables. It can be just a whole lot easier to just do the procedure via oral capsules, comfort of your own home, feed it with a treat or anything else, and very easy. So not a
So
stressful procedure as well. Some dogs or cats, like, they'd go through a lot of stress having to get that done.
yeah, for sure. What are some of the symptoms that pets may be experiencing that in your mind you're like, okay, these are really great candidates for
Yeah,
FMT?
the most obvious ones are, of course, diarrhea. That was the first use case for FMT in humans dating back like 4,000 years ago. So diarrhea, C. diff, that's the most obvious one. But then even beyond that, any sort of skin issues, whether it's itching skin or hair loss, so those are great ones. Dogs with like repetitive ear infections is a great use case. Of course, like inflammatory bowel disease, which sort of like IBS, IBD, those types of cases would respond really well to it. I think allergies is another great use case where FMT can work really well because allergies is typically like a leaky gut type response. I know more and more now in dogs, we're seeing the diagnosis of like SIBO or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. I think that's another great use case. And then, as you pointed out, some of the like, mental, emotional, behavioral, anxiety type symptoms, I think rebuilding the microbiome can play a really positive, strong role. But broadly speaking, again, in humans, and a lot of this translates, of course, to animals, because animals get all the similar diagnoses, right? And in many
Yeah.
cases, even the same drugs. And so, it's anything that's GI related, right? Like any symptom that is GI related is something that FMT is typically being studied or used in. And then a lot of neurological stuff. So whether it's, Parkinson's or dementia or Alzheimer's or MS or autism, like all of these neurological conditions. And then as well, autoimmune. There's a huge tie between autoimmunity and gut function. And so, yeah, there's a lot of different use cases, but the core ones in pets, I would say, is just any dog with diarrhea. Dogs don't typically deal with as much constipation as, say, humans do. But if there were a case of constipation, that would definitely be indicated. And then there's just this category as well of people who want to just generally support their dog before they get sick. So I think that's a huge opportunity, just being more proactive, right? Don't wait until they develop a disease. Let's do this more proactively. And then it can also be combined in more of these chronic diseases where dogs are dealing with like liver diseases and kidney diseases and cancers and other things like that. This can be really supportive as well because the microbiome plays a really important role in that disease, but also in supporting the treatments that someone might be doing to try to either eliminate the problem or just support them as long as they can through the disease life course.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many use cases. Can you think of anything off the top of your head where you'd be like, no, I definitely wouldn't even want to consider FMT?
Yeah. I mean, generally speaking, it's very safe. It's generally very well tolerated. In humans, for example, they don't take it during pregnancy, but we've had many parents give it to their dog in the hope that they'll support the dog's microbiome and the puppy's microbiome will be better. I mean, naturally, it'd be better to do it before they conceive, but there's really no reason you couldn't do it during. I would say if they, were really fragile, right? Like the dog is very ill and just introducing something at that point doesn't make a lot of sense if they're kind of slowly on their way out. But yeah, or if they had like a really serious infection or something else. Like if the dog is really sick, there's no point trying to introduce this. But outside of that, there's really no harm in trying it for most cases and just seeing. Not all cases are, of course, going to see a response, but generally speaking, there's not like an obvious, oh, this is an obvious red flag. If
Good.
their immune system is really, degraded and they didn't have a lot of immune activity, that might be a reason to consider it. But many dogs aren't being tested for that, right? So it'd be hard to
Yeah.
say, oh, my dog has like a really impaired immune system. And so I'm gonna, avoid or I'm gonna do a certain treatment. So that would be something to potentially consider. But yeah.
Yeah. So going back to this idea that, X is wrong, so we take Y pill. I think that in my experience, a lot of people have treated multiple things in this regard, whether it's probiotics or I've definitely seen people do it with FMT capsules. And they're like, "Oh, I'm not going to change anything, but I'm going to give this FMT to my dog." And then after, they'll see a little bit of, good result pretty immediately, and then they're like, oh, but then my dog went right back. So it didn't work. Well, I think this is probably a good point to go back to what you were talking about earlier with continuing support. So how do you like to educate pet parents in that
Yeah.
regard?
So, these microbes are only as good as the diet that they're getting, right? So different groups of bacteria, their goal, their job is to break down fibers. Because humans, we don't have the ability to break down fibers and get all the benefits from them. So that's what the microbes do. They break down fibers, but not all fibers feed all bacteria. So you need a variety of different fibers to fuel and feed these different bacteria. And then the great thing is these bacteria then start to release stuff. As an example, short chain fatty acids. So short chain fatty acids then are the fuel source themselves for the lining, the cells that line the gastrointestinal tract. So butyrate as an example. So butyrate would actually feed the cells that line the digestive tract and then help that gut lining, which, we think of leaky gut, begin to recover and heal. So they release anti-inflammatory types of compounds that allow for healing within the gut. And if the gut can heal and the leaky gut can heal, you're not having an inflammation leaking everywhere, which is causing and or exacerbating most of these diseases to begin with. And so the diet is really a critical piece, right? Like we really need to make sure that the dog is eating a clean, healthy diet and it's as diverse as possible. You had mentioned that the green juju. I love what those guys are doing over there. Gussie's got also has some really cool formulas where they're getting a lot of diversity. And so it's still fine to be feeding, if your opinion is like, oh, I'm really believing my dog needs to eat a more carnivorous diet. Well, it's not a big deal just to broaden that a little bit, right? Whether it's with tripe or some of these meal toppers, which give more diversity. They'll get 10, 15% of their diet from more plant-based sources that can give the fibers that those new microbes need to grow and thrive and survive. So if you do FMT and you introduce all these healthy new microbes and they begin to engraft, but then you don't change the diet and it doesn't become more diverse and you're still on a poor quality kibble diet, well, most likely they're not getting the fibers that they need to grow and thrive, and they'll just slowly die away. And a lot of the benefits that you've seen initially will diminish. And so that's really where, we try to advocate as much as possible to try to incorporate more raw feeding and as much as your sort of philosophies vary, but incorporating at least some um,
Yeah.
variety of fruits and veg because that does give more diversity of the fibers, and then that allows more of these microbes to engraft, grow, thrive, etc.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like that is as important, if not, I don't want to say more important. I mean, what if people have gotten to the point where they even know what FMT is, like, you're doing pretty good.
Right. Well, and
I feel like,
frankly, I think a lot of the people that work with, we'd have to do some sort of poll or something, but a lot of people that even come to this, as you pointed out, have already figured that part out, right? They're like, okay,
yeah,
the diet is kind of a critical piece, and so uh, I would say the majority are focusing on better diet than the
yeah,
average who've not come this far and who are not listening to this podcast. But even if they are, right, and a small change can be meaningful, right? Like if it's a cost consideration or it's some other thing that's preventing you, the time or some other thing, even making small steps in that direction will have larger and long-term benefits. So yeah, if switching to 100% raw diet today is too much, or there's all these individual cases, right? Like some dogs just don't eat the food, and there's all these variables. But even doing a little bit and pushing a little bit outside of what they're doing can have a positive benefit. And it might just mean, in some of these unique cases, they may need to do more supplements and maybe they need to repeat FMT a little more frequently than someone who was able to really manage the diet. So there's a lot of factors that.
yeah. So I'd like to talk. I mean, you've mentioned a few things that are specific to legacy biome, but I'd like to talk a little bit more about what really makes legacy different from other FMT that may be out on the market for pets specifically. I know one of the things that you do, you're very, very particular about the donor animals. So can you talk to me a little bit more about what you do there, what that protocol is, what you're looking for, what you're making sure isn't there, all the things?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, to me, it's the combination of the donors and the donor network and the manufacturing that create a product that is both safe and efficacious. Like We don't want a product that's just safe but not efficacious, or efficacious but not safe. It has to be both. And so, from a manufacturing standpoint, we've taken what we've done in human drug manufacturing and translated a lot of it over to what we do with the animal side of things. And so, we are very focused on manufacturing that really makes a product have a lot of the microbes still surviving, but also clean and all the other things that go into manufacturing a product. So we know from a safety standpoint, manufacturing side is a checkbox. But from a donor standpoint, that also plays a role in the safety, because we need to make sure we're testing the donors on a frequent basis to ensure there's nothing pathogenic there that, if transferred to a dog that's more fragile, has a weaker immune system, could make them sick and cause a problem. So donor screening is a big thing. But the gut microbiome as a whole, it comes from, generationally. Like, we're getting this microbiome through the generations. It's not just something where you're like, oh yeah, I got this healthy puppy off of Kijiji or some backyard breeder, but I know nothing about where they come from. Yeah, the puppy may be healthy today, but they're probably not dealing with a healthy gut microbiome. And so the gut microbiome does come generationally. And so that's something that I think is important, but also how the dog was reared from a puppy, and then also the generations before them. So that looks like eating a raw diet. In our case, the dogs that we use never had an antibiotic. And antibiotics, I mean, they're like nuclear bombs to the gut microbiome, and it can take years to rebuild from an antibiotic. Even though they can be life saving, I know in some cases they're truly amazing, but in a lot of
Hmm.
cases they're overused. The
Yeah.
dog's living environment, right? Like, what type of a living environment are they in? Sometimes people are kind of like, "Oh, I hope these dogs aren't living in some kennel somewhere. And you're just going in to collect poop." No, actually, they live a very lovely life. A lot of exercise, a lot of, play, and all of the things that we know are beneficial for dogs as they are for humans. And then a diet that is really raw, clean, organic, where they're not getting exposure to chemicals and pesticides and all of the things that we know damage the gut microbiome. Flea and tick medicines, avoiding all that stuff. So really looking at the dog themselves, the dog's history and their legacy, right? That's where the name comes from. This legacy of donors that have had their microbiome protected, because it's hard. I mean, it really is hard to protect the microbiome in an environment, in a world today where it's so easy to get exposure to chemicals and pesticides and other things that we know are damaging to the gut. And it does take a lot of care and attention to make sure that that's protected. And so the more interventions that a pet has had, the more likely they are to have had a damaged gut microbiome. Now, even a really sick dog who has C. diff could benefit from another dog who has a, moderately healthy microbiome. But for more of these complex cases, where the typical stuff just not working, we need a better, healthier microbiome that represents, generations of protection. So that's really what we're after. The history of the donor is a really critical piece, and what the donor is eating is a critical piece to ensure we're getting as much diversity in the gut microbiome, and that we're transplanting then via these capsules as much of it as possible as well.
So I think I know this is a really, to me, I feel like it's a pretty difficult question to answer, especially in such a short period of time. When we say a healthy microbiome, how do we measure that? How does legacy measure that?
Yeah, that is a really good question. I think the reality is, and I have friends in the gut health testing industry, and I love to see what they're doing. But the reality is like, we don't really know. And so you can test the gut microbiome, and that is something that we do. It's good. Like, I think testing in a lot of cases of the microbiome is just information, right? Just like the friend that had, some bug elevated and they're deciding what to do. It's information, but it's not the be all end all. We're just not there yet. We don't even know all of the bugs that exist within the microbiome to begin with. And so to try to assume that we know what a healthy balance is just, it's very premature. And so that's why I go back to, okay, what are the things that we know damage the gut microbiome, and what are the things that we know support a healthy gut? And knowing that, microbiomes are passed generationally, the more we can ensure that a dog generationally has been avoiding all of these things that we know damage the gut microbiome means that they're going to be at a better, have a better chance of having this healthy gut microbiome, and we're transplanting that. So yeah, microbiome testing is complicated. I think there's definitely use cases for it where there's an advantage to doing some testing, but even that, like, what matters more to you, right? What's on a result of a lab, or
Yeah.
your pet showing an improvement in their symptoms or their behaviors or some other thing, right? And so it is complicated. The technology is improving, this whole emergence of AI and being able to study all of these things. I think there's going to be a future where we'll get a lot of answers via the testing. But where we're at today, I just don't think that, it gives us a ton of really useful information. And so, yeah, I'm on the fence.
Yeah. Well, again, I know when I'm trying to explain these things to people, of course, I'm trying to do it as not a doctor, as somebody who's just like person to person. Let's be real and talk about this. Is basically like we can look at all of the tests in the world, but at the end of the day, how does your dog feel? Right? Like, what are their symptoms
Right, and
or
a
lack of
lot of money
symptoms?
can go into diagnostics, right? Like, you
Mhm.
can spend thousands of dollars on testing, but there's just some things we know to be foundational and we know to be true. Like, your dog needs to have a healthy diet. I mean, that's just not a debatable fact. And so I generally think, like, of course there's a use there's a time where you need to do testing. I'm not disputing that. And a lot of the conventional labs can be awesome. You got to understand what's going on if your dog is ill. Like, you don't want to miss some sort of a disease because you're like, oh, I'm only going to focus on treatment. But in the average case, I think you can go a long ways just purely with doing some simple interventions. And so spending the money and the effort in making these simple interventions and simple changes. And then if you're still struggling or still seeing challenges, then choosing to potentially do some testing to guide you along the way. But as the first thing to do, I would start with interventions.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about the capsule itself. Can you explain to me what's different there? What people need to know?
I mean, the product is encapsulated, double encapsulated. So I mentioned that, right? So the outer capsule is enteric coated, and so the advantage of having it being enteric coated is and double encapsulated is it's more likely to get through the stomach and still be intact, because the whole goal of the stomach acid is to both break down proteins but also kill potential pathogens, and any bacteria that come in would be considered a potential pathogen. And so we want to try to protect the microbes from the acidic environment of the stomach to try to make sure they get through. The other thing is the product is freeze dried, so that means it's shelf stable at room temperature. Long term storage, we just suggest keeping it in a fridge, but very stable at shelf temperature. So there's no requirement for like dry ice or fancy medical freezers or other things like that. And the advantage as well of a freeze dried product is that it's not metabolically active. So it's not dying every day when it's still in its live format. So the product and the bacteria in it wake up, if you will, when they're exposed to moisture. And so once they get open into the small intestine, there's moisture there, and they perk up and they become awake and they go off and do their thing. And so it's actually a way of like freezing in time the microbiome and then waking it up again at a later date when it's then needed, as opposed to having, a curve where they're dying off much quicker when they're, say, just frozen. So, that makes advantages from a shipping standpoint, from a storage standpoint, from a shelf life standpoint. So there's a lot of advantages there. And then from a manufacturing standpoint, our goal is to really concentrate for the microbiome. We're counting on you getting fiber from the diet. We're not trying to put in
Mhm.
all of the fiber that would be in,
Mhm.
the stool. So we're screening and getting rid of a lot of the fiber that would come from a normal, stool sample, so that we're really concentrating for the microbes and transplanting that versus the fibers. So it's really concentrating the microbes from the stool into a final product that is a capsule.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, that's a lot. That's a lot, but it's good. It's good. I think for people to know what they're getting and why it's done the way it's done, because you do obviously at the end of the day want people to get results from the product that you're selling them. And again, going back to making sure you're setting, I used to talk about this with training a lot, setting your dog up for success, but like we need to be doing the same things for their health and setting up the microbiome for success and utilizing FMT as part of that. So, because of that, I'm really, really excited to be partnering with Legacy Biome. So, you're going to hear more about Legacy Biome on the podcast for sure. But that is because it is so important because gut health is so, so important. And because this is what I do, I want to keep talking to you about it and making sure that you understand, as a pet parent, as somebody who has dogs and cats in their homes, like not only why this is so important, but what you can do. You can be proactive, you can be reactive, you can do all of the things and utilize what's available to you. And I love that Legacy Biome is available direct to consumer. You don't have to go through a veterinarian to get it. So,
Well, I look forward to this. And you pointed something out. I think we'll do a full circle before, but like you had mentioned that dogs, despite them being outside of what would have been a normal, natural environment for them, are so inclined and eager to please us and do the best that they possibly can to a
yeah.
flaw. I mean,
Yes.
it's really shocking that there's an animal that exists that would please you. Even though in a lot of cases pet parents don't deserve the love that their animal even gives them. But I was reflecting on this, and it came through actually another podcast interview that I was on, and someone was asking me, like, why are you involved in this type of work and everything? But I really feel strongly, and I've experienced this myself, that pets are like a conduit to our own health and well-being. And I think all pet parents can relate to a dog having such a profound impact on them very positively. But also there can be negative, right? Like if your dog isn't well, the impact that it can have on you emotionally and mentally and even physically can be really profound. And so I think these dogs who do so much to give us their love and undivided attention and try to please us at all costs, even though sometimes they do very dumb things along the way, they deserve our best. They deserve our best when it comes to the food and when it comes to the way that we treat and care for them. And I think the more that we can support them to be their best and healthy, the more that it will reflect on us in a very positive way. And so I think both kids and pets, they really have this way of improving our lives and our worlds. And I think by giving them the best that we can and supporting them in all the ways that we can, we'll just make everything and everyone better and happier.
That's amazing. Yes, and you're so right. And I actually I mean, that's such a good place to end the podcast, but I have one more question for you. So we're just going to do it. And so one of the other things that I have been trying to really weave into the podcast since the beginning of 2025 is incorporating a little bit more about how pet parents can also take this information and utilize it for themselves to be healthier. And this, while you're obviously not selling FMT for humans, one of the things I know studies have shown that we share microbiota with everyone in our household, including our pets. So, as a naturopathic doctor, I think maybe you could talk to this a lot better than I could, for sure. If our pets are in such a state of poor health where they are in need of intervention, whether that's FMT or anything else, that we should also be looking at ourselves.
Especially those people that, let their dogs, love on them and lick them all over. Yeah, I don't disagree. I mean, microbes are moving all the time. I jokingly say, be careful who you're hugging and shaking hands with
Yes.
because there is this movement of microbes all the time. But at the same time, it's go out and hug and shake hands because that's a big part of improving our microbiomes. When I give talks at, human conferences, I jokingly, but it's true. I tell people, go hug trees, like the microbiome that we have comes from the earth. And so, I'm a environmentalist when it comes to protecting the world, the Earth's microbiome, because that's our microbiome, right? And if we destroy the Earth's microbiome, we will then inherently destroy our own microbiome. And so we definitely need to, do more like the dogs and like roll around in the dirt and, go run into the ocean and go swim in lakes and maybe chewing on sticks is probably a little too far. But yeah, I mean, the Earth is our microbiome. And so we should go interact and play with it and don't try to be sterile because sterile is not who we are. I mean, we have more bacteria in and on us than we do human cells. We're more bacteria than we're human cells. And so, what's really running the show here? It's not the human cells. It ain't the brain cells either. Surely there's a lot of control there, but a lot of it does stem from the microbiome and the interplay between all of those things. And so the same concepts of like having the lifestyle, having the diet, having more diversity in the diet, right? Getting good sleep, getting exercise, all of these things play a really important role in our health as humans. And of course, the more that, humans learn about what's important to them, they then translate in many respects to their pets. And so we've seen that, like it started with probiotics for humans, and the people are like, wait a minute, like if this is good for a human, why wouldn't this be good for a dog? And so a lot of the products that were originally designed for and went through clinical trials for humans eventually then made their way down to being used in our pets. And so, yeah, I think that's definitely an important thing. We can't overlook the importance of our human health. How much, the microbiomes talk back and forth, I don't know, but definitely it's happening.
Yeah, I think this last little segment here might be one of my favorites all time on the episode, on of any episode, because it is something that I just have gotten so much more passionate about over the last handful of years because I'm one of those I see this all the time. It's either something happens to you or somebody in your family and you start going down the rabbit hole of learning about like actual real health and not pharmaceuticals, like you're starting to learn about food and all of the things, and then over time you look at your dog and you're like, why am I feeding you this crappy kibble, right? Like that happens. But also I see a lot, and this is how it happened for me, was that I just was doing so much better for my pets, and then eventually one day I was like, why am I not doing this for myself? Right? And so for all of those people out there that are where I was a handful of years ago, I just know how overwhelming that can be, how overwhelming that can feel, and that you can absolutely can make huge, huge changes in your life, in your pets' lives. We have so much more control than we think we do.
A
So
hundred
I
percent.
appreciate that. I appreciate that, and I appreciate you, Jason, and Legacy Biome. Again, we're going to be talking a lot more about FMT and Legacy Biome because I'm just such a huge fan, and as my cat is walking
Visit it.
across my computer,
That's a good
she
segue because we'll have to at some point talk more about cats. And we're soon to
yeah.
be launching a cat FMT product.
I'm so excited for that because that was actually I will say most of my this is just what the universe sends you things, right? Like,
Like us.
you don't ask for it, the universe is just like, "Here you go." And the majority of my dog clients are SIBO cases, and I think it's because of the podcasts that I have put out in the past, most of my but I also there are so many cats that are quote unquote diagnosed with IBD. We all know that's not a real diagnosis, but that's what they get diagnosed with. And there are just so many cats out there with IBD. And I think that's the majority of the cat cases I get are also
Yeah.
their IBD. So
Wow.
I feel like this is what the universe is like. Here you go, gut health. This is this is all you're doing.
You talked about it. I'm showing up to deliver.
Yeah, so I'm really excited for to be talking to you more about Legacy Biome, not just today, but also in the future.
Great. Well, thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to it.
Awesome, Jason. Thank you so much for being here, uh, guys. Well, first off, anything else you would like to say? I always like to give you the last word, if at all
No,
possible.
no, no, not specifically. I mean,
Yeah,
if you've listened to this, go give your dog some love, your cat, a belly
yeah.
scratch if they'll accept it, and keep being awesome.
Yeah, yeah. All the links will be in the show notes. Check it all out there. Follow Legacy Biome on socials, and I'll have a link if you are interested in purchasing for your pet as well. So, with that, like Jason said, give your pet some extra love from both of us today, and I will talk to you next week.
Awesome. See you around.